So that's how it sounded over the weekend. Two big ones. Indiana and Don Fischer, the voice of the Hoosiers that you heard there, vaulting their way into the top three in college football. And dare I say it, I'm going to allow all of you right now to go ahead and set the recording device on whatever way you're listening, whether it be right now on the app, whether you're listening at 93.5 and 107.5 FM, whether you're listening at 107.5 or 107.5thefan.com, whatever means in which you are hearing my voice right now, you might as well record this so you can play it later because you still won't believe it. Through 6 weeks of the National Football League season in 2025, your Indianapolis Colts are the number one seed in the American Football Conference and are tied with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the best record in professional football. Listen again to what I just said. The Indianapolis Colts, who are leading the AFC South, are a game clear of everyone in their division at minimum. They are a game clear of everybody in the AFC West, and they can further cement and pull away from that if they were to, for example, beat the LA Chargers coming up next. They are a half game clear of everybody in the AFC North, and they're a half game clear of everybody in the AFC East. The Indianapolis Colts are 5-1. And yesterday was one of those games that you say, you know what? You take the win and you move along, and there's plenty to unpack from it. Because, yes, as the week goes on, we can start to nitpick or talk about areas that are of concern that, dare I say it, need to be cleaned up. But you did the things that you need to do. And that's, to me, what is the most remarkable so far about this franchise and this group, is now we have transitioned from I'm looking at the schedule, trying to figure out the places where they're going to get a win, to I'm looking at the schedule to try to figure out places where they're going to stub their toe. And as long as they mind their P's and Q's and do what they need to do, then you look at it and you go, okay, the Chargers will be tough in L.A. Kansas City is certainly going to be tough. Outside of that, does Seattle scare you? Although they're kind of in the same mold, having that year where you're like, really? Are they good? And this is an NFL town. The NFL is the 800-pound gorilla. The NFL is the top dog, and last night you're watching Sunday Night Football, and yeah, the ALCS is on, but you're still looking at the standings, and you're talking about the Colts, and you're talking about the bizarre nature of the pregame yesterday, and you're talking about the resiliency of Daniel Jones to throw a pick six and then come back with this composure that the rest of the team seems to rally around. And you're talking about Jonathan Taylor and the unique ability the Colts have not only to utilize him and take advantage of the fact he's the best back in the National Football League, but also the schemes, the way that they're coming up with freeing him up, using the versatility of their offensive linemen to lead him, to pull, to move in different directions. You're talking about the way that Tyler Warren is a complete game changer for them. Talking about the fact that there are some question marks maybe within their linebacking core, but again, they make plays when they need to defensively down the stretch. Talking about whether or not that was a defensive pass interference that helped them in the end, but not looking a gift horse in the mouth, because there have been other plays over the course of the season that did go their way as well, or maybe went against them, and all of those things start to balance themselves out. And there are so many things that you can look at yesterday. The what is it about Anthony Richardson where the bizarre seems to find him? And that's at times, and I've said this before about him, it's not always his fault with Anthony Richardson. There are times with this poor guy, again, Goodwill Hunting. It's not your fault, son. It's not your fault. But for whatever reason, the bizarre seems to find him. He is literally a magnet to the odd. And again, it's going to cost him time. And I realize he's not the guy that's taking snaps for you regardless. But it's impossible to not go back in your mind and say to yourself, isn't this part of why Daniel Jones was selected as the starter to begin with? Because you just kind of knew this was going to be can you imagine if Anthony Richardson's your starter? Can you imagine if your starting quarterback goes down because of a freak accident where a stretch band snaps back and hits him in the eye and fractures his orbital bone? All of those things. And with all of that compound, with all of those ingredients put in, like each one of them is an individual shot put into this cocktail that I'm serving to you, it is still not as potent, perhaps. It is still not as strong a mixed drink, perhaps, as what might be the bigger story. And I never thought in doing sports talk radio in an NFL city, I never, ever thought, and it's not going to happen a lot, and I'm not saying it even is happening right here. Here's the dilemma that we have at this radio station. Here's the dilemma that I have as a host of this program. Of those listening to my voice right now that are sports fans in Indianapolis, probably 80% of you are fans of the Colts. If you live in Indianapolis and you're a sports fan, and I say 80% because, and I know, gasp, dare I say it, there are people that have a team, either A, you didn't grow up in Indianapolis. You grew up in Milwaukee, moved down here for Lily. You're a diehard Packer fan. Yeah, you like the Colts, they're fine, but the Packers are your team. Or you grew up a Cowboys fan or a Steelers fan, and when you were in the 8th grade, the Colts moved here. And you eventually learned, but you can't get rid of that deep down childhood fandom. So you like the Colts, but your favorite team is the whatever, right? You have that. Or, it could be that Grandpa was a diehard Bears fan, and your first memories were sitting on Grandpa's lap watching the Bears. And so you've always liked the Bears because of Grandpa. I get it. But 80% of you, by and large, are Colts fans. 85 probably. Might even be higher. On the college side of things, 60% of you are Indiana fans. 40% of you are diehard Notre Dame fans. 20% are diehard Purdue fans. Not the higher percentage of fan listening to me right now is wanting to hear about the Indianapolis Colts. And that's the challenge, because the NFL is king and the Colts are the king, right? Not only is the NFL king, the Indianapolis Colts right now are king of the NFL, at least for this season. I realize the reigning Super Bowl champ would be technically the king, but Indianapolis is the number 1 seed in the AFC. But the best story in football right now in the United States of America, the best story in sports right now in the state of Indiana, the story that is the one that has the most surreal line going, the story that is the one that you wouldn't believe it if you went in a time machine and I went back and tried to tell two year ago version of me, that arguably the best team in college football is the Indiana Hoosiers. And I get it. I get that I am speaking to a smaller percentage of you. I understand it. I'm asking of you that you hear me out on this, even if you're not a fan of Indiana. I totally understand and respect it, and I appreciate your ear. And we'll have plenty of time to talk about the NFL. But I thought about this very long and hard, and I thought about it very seriously. What is the bigger story right now in Indianapolis? The more popular story is that of the Colts. They're both great stories. They're both great, right? They're great. The more popular story is that of the Colts based on the numbers. Again, delicatessen. Colts are turkey sandwiches. Most of you coming in are wanting turkey. But at the same time, when all of a sudden I realize that I have the absolute best batch of pastrami ever, that's rare. They're the Mackinac peaches. You can only get them so often. I've got to be able to tell people, listen, you got to try this. And right now, Indiana football and what they did this weekend, what Curt Cignetti has done, And what that program is doing is the best story right now in college football. If I'm doing sports talk radio right now in Mesa, Arizona, if I'm doing sports talk radio right now in Galveston, Texas, if I'm doing sports talk radio right now in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, I'm talking about the fact that Indiana may be the most complete football team in the country. Ohio State's unbelievable. No question. No question. But in terms of, you know what Indiana did on Saturday? Indiana on Saturday went into Oregon and outpaced Oregon. They outfasted Oregon. Oregon, which is a team that is known for its speed. Oregon, that is a team that's known for playing in space. Oregon, that's a team that's known for having a defense that can be smothering because of their speed, and then obviously athletes galore. Oregon with unlimited budget and Phil Knight Nike money, and the Duck holding up the sign saying that the Indy 500 is Walmart F1, all that, right? Oregon is a cachet, a brand. Oregon, a team, when you go in, that's won 20-plus straight games at home, the whole deal, hasn't lost a conference game, all of it. And Indiana went in there. Indiana, which 2 years ago was snapping and singing their fight song after beating Akron in 4 overtimes. 2 years ago. The biggest basement, dog-dwelling joke program in college football of all time. Not narrative, fact. The losingest program in the history of Division I college football 2 years ago. Celebrating a 4 overtime win against Akron 2 years ago. And now, Indiana is ranked in the top 5. They are the third-ranked team in the country. What do we believe about rankings? Usually not a lot, unless your team's ranked third, and then you're like, hallelujah, let's talk about the rankings. But Indiana, they have the best resume right now in college football because their linebackers make plays, because their running backs make plays, because their quarterback makes plays, because their coach is a leader and is vociferous and is confident, all of it, all across the board. And that happens on Saturday, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, what possibly could even equate to this big a story heading into to start Monday morning? And that's the fact that the Colts now have the best record in the National Football League, at least tied with it with Tampa Bay. What a weekend. What an incredible weekend, and we got plenty to unpack over the course of today. Don Fischer going to join us, the voice of the Hoosiers, about 15 minutes from now. Mike Chappell will join us to talk a little bit of Colts at 1 o'clock today. And I believe preseason college basketball polls come out today. Rob Blackmon is going to join us, the voice of the Purdue Boilermakers, coming up at the 2 o'clock hour. We can do both football and basketball with Rob, but certainly from a basketball standpoint, there's a lot to look forward there as well. And the Pacers in action tonight taking on the San Antonio Spurs. But I'm telling you, it was an unbelievable weekend. And I did not think that anything over the course of the 17 weeks of the National Football League season could, I'm not going to say eclipse, but equate to a talking point during the course of the season like the NFL does, but college football right now with Indiana is right there. I really did think, I'll admit this now, I thought Indiana would go in and hang with Oregon. I did. And I was a little bit curious about whether or not Oregon, when I saw Oregon against Penn State, I was so impressed by the way they played down the stretch of that game and their offensive efficiency against Penn State. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a monumental task for Indiana, not just against Oregon, but going into Happy Valley as well. 2 big tests for the Hoosiers. And then once Penn State completely fell apart, and we'll get more into that later because that does fall back to Indiana when you're talking about Penn State football and where they go from here. And I think you all know what I'm talking about there. But I wondered if maybe Oregon, okay, is Oregon not as stout as we thought? I still think they're extremely good. But Indiana went in and out-Oregoned Oregon. That's what was so impressive to me about it. So then you flip the page to the next day, you're still in that gaze about all of it, and you hear the news. Before the game even began for the Colts, it was bizarre. Before the game even began, it was bizarre. First off, the play with Mooney Ward, and you saw it, I say play, in the pregame. He's going out, he's running a pattern, he's at full speed, and Drew Ogletree's doing the same thing. And it had to be like slow motion for the two assistants that were involved in each respective player. Watching, literally, it's like you're watching it unfold, probably thinking to them, the other one's got to know, and then boom, the collision, and now Ward is down, and that is such an important aspect because you knew going into the game that Charvarius Mooney Ward was going to have one job. One job. Follow Marvin Harrison Jr. everywhere he goes. And while Marvin Harrison Jr., we know, partially because his name is Marvin Harrison Jr., partially because of the pedigree, Ohio State, and partially because of the film, we know what a talent he is. But he hasn't really gotten off and running at the professional level, but he's starting to show it. Had a primetime game recently where looked like he was some assembly required out of the box. And then it started to come together. And so you knew what a player that was, and you knew with Jacoby Brissett, whenever you get a backup quarterback that's coming in, and Brissett is a competent player, no question. We know that in Indianapolis. But he's going to have to go safety net. He's going to have to go layups. He's going to have to go with the cushion of a player to get him in rep. And you knew that was going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. So before the game even begins, the guy whose job is going to be stick with him like he's gum and let me know if he's dentine. Boom, out. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., speaking of the bizarre, out. So there were all these weird things going on. The Anthony Richardson injury. The last time that I heard of an injury like that, and I don't know if it was the exact same injury, but I do recall Reggie Miller, if we're going on local reference standpoint, Reggie Miller having the season, I believe it was 96, where he had an eye socket fracture or break that led him to miss time and then wear the goggles and everything else. And it was a lengthy process. And you hope the best for Anthony Richardson, don't get me wrong, but it just seems, be it fair or not, that the bizarre is attached anywhere he goes, right? But the thing that I thought was key in the game yesterday, and the thing that, again, validated, we're past the point now of trying to validate the Daniel Jones selection as the starting quarterback. The guy is having potentially an MVP season at this point. But what Daniel Jones did yesterday, to me, that was the most impressive, was Arizona's a little bit different. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, an NFL offensive coordinator. I'm not a defensive coordinator. I don't pretend to be either one or know the nuances of what goes into the schemes, the looks, all of that in the National Football League level. But I do know that Arizona, there are certain defenses that you go in and they present a certain look to you and you know right away what they're doing. You can go back and watch video of whether it be Manning or Luck, Phillip Rivers, quarterbacks in this town that have been able to go up to the line of scrimmage, look across, see exactly what's happening, and say, okay, Mike linebacker's here, here's exactly what they're doing. And oftentimes, if a play is called that they know may not be, it's not that they're looking for the best play, they're looking to audible out simply to get out of a bad play. So they're coming up to the line and they're saying, okay, they've called for me a bubble screen here, but the way they're lined up defensively, that play ain't going to work. So I'm just going to audible to a handoff to get out of that play, and then we'll move along and regroup. And there is a skill that comes with that. And Daniel Jones yesterday, I thought was really, really good considering he was seeing as tricky a junk defense as he will see all year. In terms of a defense that gives him looks at the line that are totally different than the look that they are actually going to execute once the ball is snapped. And more often than not, through his progressions, and I know he threw a pick, right, a costly pick, but his ability to bounce back from that, his ability to quickly process, compute, analyze, and then go out of a bad play to eventually get back into a good play, I thought was a huge key. And it goes back to, again, and we'll hear later from Shane Steichen talking about it, just this symbiotic nature between coach and quarterback. And that relationship right now is growing and rippling throughout the entire franchise. And there are even messages with that go across the rest of the NFL. You know, I saw that Tua in Miami called out his teammates, said enough is enough, and called out his teammates. And the thing that he called him out for was he said that it comes down to preparedness and attention to detail and being on time for meetings, organizational things. Because what have we heard about the quarterback position? It's organizational. It's more than just coming up and being able to throw the football. It's about being able to process all of that. And we didn't know that Daniel Jones was that guy. I don't know that we had a chance in New York to see that Daniel Jones is that guy. But whether it be just the brief time he was in Minnesota, whether it be being able to then sit back and analyze and really look over everything that took place for him in New York, whatever it may be, everything now, the marriage between Daniel Jones and Shane Steichen is working, and it's working for the entire roster because I think they are following in line of the example being set of organizational. And there's a ton to get to and a ton to celebrate. And really it is, when I talk about symbiotic, it's a symbiotic nature in this town right now of two football teams. Two football teams, both of which not only, and I'm not going to say that Indiana's exceeding expectation. We knew they were going to be really good. But you look at Indiana and you look at the Colts, and now you're looking at it going, you know what? Good teams find ways to win games. That Iowa game was huge for Indiana because good teams dig down, they find a way, and then they put it behind them and they move along and they get better. And the Colts, I think, have done the same thing as well. And you start to look at the schedule, and the sugar plum fairies start dancing in your head because there's a lot to be excited about. And Don Fischer deserves to be as excited about it as anybody because he sat through a lot of bad football, and he's getting rewarded with, as you heard, the excitement in his voice, the story of college football. And he's going to join us on the other side, and we'll take a look back on what was a spectacular day in Eugene, and we'll do it next. You're listening to Query and Company here on a victorious Monday on The Fan. The Indiana Hoosiers, they go out to Autzen Stadium in Eugene, Oregon, and I thought out Oregon to Oregon because, look, I think the world of Oregon and the way that that football program and the fact that they seem to always have speed at every position, and Indiana was faster, Indiana was better. 30-20, they win. Don Fischer joining us now on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. And Don Todd Meyer, our executive producer, just came in and said, and Todd's a Purdue guy, by the way, and he said, I'm just happy for Don Fischer. And we've talked about that before, but Don, this is unbelievably cool. And I know that we went through this last year, but man, it feels like it's even another rung higher, doesn't it?
It does right now. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, Indiana winning over Oregon at Oregon against a team that everybody picked to win that ball game. And now Indiana's moved up into the spot that they were essentially in, the third position in the rankings. It's like it's kind of a fairy tale, if you know what I mean, especially for those of us who have been around Indiana football for as long as I have. But at the same time, it's not a fairy tale. We know that. It's reality, and it's probably the most fun I've ever had calling football games.
Don, I think the thing, and I want you to tell me if you agree with this or if what I'm about to say even makes sense, but to me the thing that is the most astounding of this is it is a complete mindset shift and culture change. And by that I mean, I'm watching that game with Oregon, and I'm sitting there visualizing and seeing the lane open up where I think to myself, this is going to be a typical Curt Cignetti Indiana game where they just wait for the other team to make mistakes. They keep their foot on the pedal. They pull away, and in the last couple minutes, you know what's going to happen. And that is such the antithesis of the mindset that we had for so long. It is remarkable to me that we in 2 years have almost forgotten about what it was like to be an Indiana fan for the previous 100. Does that make sense?
It does, except I'll never forget.
Well, yeah.
what it was like before. But I will tell you this. There's no question that it's a complete mind change. It really is. And as quickly as it has come, that's the most remarkable thing, because I don't know that anybody has ever turned a program around faster than what Curt Cignetti has, and then turn that mindset of the fan base around along with it. Because I don't care who you are, if you've been an Indiana football fan forever, you've been, sorry about that Big Mac truck that was just going by. At any rate, if you've been a football fan in Indiana for any length of time, you know what the struggles have been. And how do you get out of that? And the Bill Mallory era was a great era of Indiana football, yeah. And nobody wants to talk about that back in the day, because they started out 0-11 in Bill's first year, and then it was 4-7 the second year. But after that, all of a sudden, for about the next 8 years, Indiana football was something special under Coach Mallory. But this has been beyond that because of the success and how quickly it has come. And so there's no way to forget the past and know what we were at that time. But at the same time, you better celebrate this while it's happening, because we don't know how long that's going to take place. But we do know that if Curt Cignetti is here that long, it's going to stay this way, because he is something special.
Don, you go back to Bill Mallory, who was a great football coach. And while I did not know him, by all account from what I've heard, a great man, right? I mean, those that played for him speak the world yes. of Bill Mallory. And right. Those teams were tough and disciplined. Cignetti's teams are those things, but, it's a different era of football now, and there's a speed there. I mean, they are literally, they swarm you. So my question would be this, and maybe we don't know this because it's only 2 years in, but do you believe that Curt Cignetti has gone out and gotten players that have basically been able to play the system that he had in mind? Or is this the kind of coach that, because of coming in here, getting the transfers, and then with the portal, he is schematically coming up with things that benefit what it is that he sees? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Jake, the thing about Cignetti is this, and I think he gets different players But here's the first thing. The first thing about Cignetti is when he looks at film, he dissects a player. He dissects what he thinks is really good, what he doesn't think is quite as good. Can I coach this kid? Is he coachable? He looks at the character of the kid first. And then he figures out if this guy progresses like we think he can, does he fit what we need? So he goes through a whole process of how he looks at players, whether they're high school kids or they're transfer portal players. And when he looks at the transfer portal, he looks at experience first, other than the character aspect. And character is one of the biggest things he looks at first. But again, he looks at playing experience. How much has this guy played? Is he coachable? Can he change? Can he do things that we ask him to do? He goes through a whole process of things. I can't even relate all the things that he asks himself about what he sees on film of a kid, and then in talking to that young man to see if he can get him to come to Indiana. So he's just unique in that way. I don't think he looks at the ranking of a player. We got more three-star guys in this football team than we have anything else, other than a few transfer portal guys that came in. But he's looking at whether he thinks the kid can develop and be the kind of player that he likes, the kind of player that's disciplined, understands his role, and then takes care of business on the field. So I just think he's unique. I'm not saying that there aren't other coaches that do exactly the same thing, because there may be. I just haven't been around them, other than a Bill Mowry type who was all about toughness and physicality when he came here. And when you watched Indiana play under Bill Mowry in his first year at Indiana, you could tell that this team was going to be better than what we'd had in the past, just by the way they went out and performed on the field. And it wasn't because they were a great team. They were 0-11 in that first season. And then they got better and better in the next 2 years. Curt Cignetti has done this in one season. He's done it the very first season he's been here, made him a successful team, got to the college football playoff. That's why this is so unique, and it's so much fun to be a part of, because we've never seen anything like it before.
Don, speaking of never seen anything like it, now I'm not saying what I'm about to say I've never seen, but it's been a while in terms of great catches, okay? There was a play in that game in Oregon that I thought exemplified the Cignetti era, and I'm talking about Omar Cooper Jr. goes up and makes a one-handed grab. I can't remember if it was a second down or a third down. I think it was in the first half of the game. But he makes this remarkable one-handed catch, right? He comes down and then has the presence of mind to then put a spin move, basically break a tackle, and dive forward to get the first down. So he had the style was there, but it was the presence of mind and the discipline to then have the substance to finish the play and go one step further. Now, some of that, Omar Cooper, the kid out of Lawrence North, he gets all the credit there, don't get me wrong. But part of that to me just feels like it exemplified attention to detail. And I don't know that I've seen a sports team that we've covered in this market have attention to detail like this Indiana football team. Now, I'm going to give you, Don Fischer, the permission here to tell me that I am full of hyperbole there.
Well, there's no question there is a tremendous amount of attention to detail on this football team for every position, for every player. They all are responsible for those things. Again, it is something that Cignetti and his coaching staff teaches. They teach you the things you have to do on the football field to be successful. And if you look at, here's the other thing, Jake, fundamentals. If you don't coach fundamentals, then you have no chance to be a great football program or a great basketball program or anything else in sports. You have to teach the fundamentals first, and they have to be a constant from a practice perspective. And if you do that, all of a sudden things start to fall in place for players. When the players realize that that's the key, is you pay attention to fundamentals and you work on those kinds of things, that's when you become a great football player and a great football team. And I think that is, again, something that this coach and this coaching staff puts forth on a daily basis in their practice sessions and all those kinds of things. And the other thing that they do, and I think this is critical this day and age, because there are so many coaches at the football, at basketball, they just practice nonstop. They'll go 2.5, 3.5 hours, those kinds of things. This coach doesn't do that. They practice an hour and 50 minutes, generally speaking. That's about it. And every moment of those practices are something's going on, something's being instructive, something's being talked about, and they work on that repetitively all the time. It's a process. To some, it could be a tedious process, but to these players, I think they've all bought into the idea, if we continue to do this the way our coach is asking us to do it, and I heard Fischer basically in an interview the other day simply say the very same thing I'm talking about here. You continue to do it day after day, week after week. You mount one practice of one fundamental on top of the other, and you just continue to work at it, and you just try to get better each and every time that you're in a practice session. I just think that philosophy is the only way to go if you're going to be successful. And maybe other schools do it. I've never seen anybody do it faster than what Cignetti has done it with this program and with this team. And maybe the transfer portal and the older guys that they get out of the portal and guys that are more experienced, they buy into it too. So it doesn't matter who coached you before. You have to buy into what they're selling now, and these kids all do it, and it's amazing.
Okay, Don, before we let you go, Don Fischer is our guest. He's on the Java House Peel and Pork guest line. He's the voice of the third-ranked Indiana Hoosiers, highest ranking in school history. Don, obviously, and it goes without saying, you mentioned it, how long is Cignetti going to be here? I'm going to get into that in a minute here, but I wanted to ask your take on this. We don't know, obviously, and it would be unfair for me to pretend that you have some sort of immediate line into the thought process of Curt Cignetti and his future. But because his home state school, a major power in Penn State, is now looking for a coach, his name is going to be linked to that. What sort of things has he said to you, insinuated to you in interviews or otherwise, just in terms of his, I guess, comfort level at Indiana and whether or not you think he is a guy that has an eye elsewhere?
The only thing I can tell you in that regard, Jake, and I have no knowledge of what his plans are in the future, other than to say this. Last year, when somebody asked him something about all the success you had this first year in Indiana, would you be looking elsewhere? He said, why would I want to leave an emerging superpower? So all I can tell you, Jake, I'm not even going to worry about that. I'm going to enjoy what I see right now, have fun with it, relish in it, and hopefully Curt Cignetti stays here forever. But if it doesn't happen that way, I'm still going to thank a man who has absolutely changed Indiana football.
No question. I mean, it's unbelievable, and it continues with Michigan State next on the schedule. That game Saturday, 3:30 start in Bloomington in what will be an awesome, awesome atmosphere, and Don Fischer will have the call, of course. Don, it was an awesome day on Saturday, third-ranked. Certainly enjoy it, and we look forward to listening with the Michigan State game coming up in 5 days from now. Appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate your having me as always.
All right, Don Fischer, the voice of the Indiana Hoosiers. We come back. There is, in fact, that speculation about Indiana, and yes, we will get much more into the Colts. Mike Chappell going to join us in 15, but for Indiana and worrying about that situation from the football standpoint, if Indiana needs to find some peace of mind in regards to their coach, need they only look in the mirror? I will explain what I mean next. Us about 8 minutes from now. Let me tell you a story that you're going to hear a lot about, at least for the, I don't know what the timeline is going to be. And certainly I am, other than Tyler Warren, I'm not naive into thinking that people in Indianapolis give too much a hoot about Penn State football. But it does start to become topical for the fact of what we were just talking about. I get it. You're a Purdue fan, Notre Dame fan, Butler fan, Indiana State fan, Ball State fan, whatever it might be. I get it. You're not tuning in to me today to hear about Indiana football. But it is a massive story, and it's incredible. What Curt Cignetti has done is incredible. And there is a reason why when he was hired, I remember just before he came to Indiana, James Madison was ranked, they were surging up the rankings, and he was being interviewed, and he had that bravado, right? That just like unapologetic, this is who we are, you take it or leave it, and we're a darn good football team, and et cetera. And it was just like, whoa, this dude is, this is a confident dude. And then he comes in, of course, in Indiana, I just win, Google me. And he's never backed down from any of it. And that bravado is exactly what probably is needed and longed for at the marquee school of his home state. And Penn State, it was literally, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when I'm watching Penn State and Oregon, and Penn State's leading that game. And what have I said on this show a gabillion times about Penn State? Every year with Penn State for the last 20 years. Ranked in the top 5 preseason, start out 6-0, big-time matchup against, typically it's Ohio State. Lead 17-6 in the fourth quarter. You get excited for Penn State, and then get outscored 21-0 in the fourth quarter and lose 27-17, and then the next week turn around and lose to Minnesota. Rinse and repeat. It's been that way for 20 years now. And yeah, I get it. Happy Valley and 105,000 people and whiteouts and all that. I get all of it. And Penn State, the program itself, one of the richest and most tradition-rich programs in college football. Joe Pa and, Shane Conlon and interceptions and knocking off Miami and Kurt Warner with the C, not a K, and, all of it, on and on and on, right? Great players, great history. And now Penn State, because of the fact that Penn State and its fan base and its alumni, they have this expectation that, in fact, it is still the same Penn State. And in branding and in legacy, it is. But in wins and losses and to today's player, it is not. And I know that Indiana fans are worried that Curt Cignetti, because he's going to be a target, Curt Cignetti is going to absolutely be on the radar for Penn State. He has coached at 3 different schools in the state of Pennsylvania. He grew up in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, he played at West Virginia, but he has coached at Indiana, Pennsylvania. He's coached at Temple. He's coached at Pitt. Right? He has coached and been around, schools in the state of Pennsylvania. And so if you are a Penn State fan, you're looking at it and you're going, this is our Brad Stevens. One would assume, I have no idea, but one would assume because he grew up in the state of Pennsylvania, even though Pennsylvania's a huge state. And maybe he grew up a Pitt or a West Virginia fan versus being a Penn State fan. I don't know. But you don't coach in the state of Pennsylvania at that many different schools without understanding the heritage, the legacy, the empowerment of Penn State football. And it's just like Indiana. So for Indiana fans that are looking and saying, oh, gosh, I'm worried it's going to be a slam dunk that Curt Cignetti goes to Penn State. It's like Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens grew up in Indiana. Now, Stevens, we know, grew up an Indiana basketball fan. We don't know that Cignetti grew up a Penn State football fan. But Stevens grew up in the height of Indiana basketball under the Bob Knight culture. Went to a smaller school in the state of Indiana, In Cignetti's case, he went to West Virginia, which is right there bordering on Pennsylvania, obviously. But then Stevens coached different school in the state of Indiana than Indiana itself, was aware of Indiana all the time, goes and takes a job. Now, admittedly, coaching and then being the president of the Boston Celtics is a hill of bean difference than being the coach at a upstart Indiana program. But nonetheless, takes another job and then gets to a situation where you look at it, and in the case of Brad Stevens in Indiana, trust me, they've tried everything to lure him back. And every time Stevens looked at it and just simply, there was always something that was the roadblock to him getting that gig. And part of that roadblock is, to be honest with you, the culture and expectation of Indiana basketball that is almost impossible to meet for anybody. There's a reason why, if you look at Indiana basketball, there's a reason why. Who was the last I ask you this, since Bob Knight left Indiana, who was the last coach that Indiana hired that was their first choice or even their second? And for Penn State football, I think Curt Cignetti looks at it the exact same way. And listen, I have all the respect in the world for the football wins and losses tradition of Penn State. Obviously, there is the dark cloud of whether or not, and we'll never know, what Joe Paterno did or didn't know of the scandal that went on at Penn State and horrible things that took place within Penn State football and whether or not that university and department and everything else were aware of it. That's a whole different topic. But in terms of 2025 football and Penn State University and everything that goes into it, all you need to do is look at James Franklin and you go, okay, so you look, and I know it was 12 years in the making, but the guy's been a good coach. He's had a terrible record against top 10 teams. I get that. But if you're Curt Cignetti, why would you leave Indiana? Yeah, Penn State might pay you $15 million. Indiana can pony up and give you that money. I can promise you that. And Indiana would be willing to do so. I can promise you that. And right now, with what he has going at Indiana, he's ranked in the top 5 right now at Indiana. Why take on the additional pressure, the additional expectation, the additional immediate hot seat at Penn State when you've got it here at Indiana and you got it pretty good and he's got it rolling? And I think when it comes down to it, Cignetti can look at home, and home is home. I realize that. But he's going to assess and analyze all of it and say, you know what? Why not Indiana? Get me the T-shirt. Why not Indiana? I'm going to stay here. And I think that's what he's going to do because I think he looks at it and his total accomplishment in his mind is not going to be going and winning a national title at a place where that is the expectation, but rather chasing one at a place where that was thought to be impossible. And that would be the ultimate feat. Mike Chappell talking Colts next. Back here on a Monday, and somebody actually said it best, I thought, in terms of the theme for today. This text that was sent to me, and it's totally true. It says, Jake, the theme of the day should be, but they are. IU should not be good and ranked third in college football, but they are. The Colts should not be the number one seed in the AFC, but they are. Now, I'll tell you who does not fall into that category, because they absolutely should be and were expected to be. But do we happen to have, Corbin, the breaking news sounder, if you could, please? Rob Blackmon will join us coming up a little over an hour from now. He is the voice of the preseason number one team in the land. The Purdue Boilermakers are your college basketball preseason number one. As for number one in the AFC, I mentioned it. It is the Indianapolis Colts at 5-1 after yesterday's win over the Arizona Cardinals. Joining us now as he does each and every Monday from CBS 4 and WXIN Fox 59. And by the way, kudos in particular to Fox 59 and Russ McQuaid yesterday. I believe they might have been the only media outlet that had the wherewithal to be in position to interview Mark Sanchez yesterday, and they have been on top of that story from day one, and that television station has been all over that. Mike Chappell, the Dean of Writers for the Colts, joining us now on the Java House Peel and Port guest line. And Chap, Colts the number one seed overall. Yesterday was a game that I thought the Colts did, Mike, what you expect good teams to do, and that is you just find a way to win. Jacoby Brissett was efficient for Arizona, but in the end, the Colts did what they needed to do to win. My question for you would be this: are we going to eventually have to address or discuss any vulnerabilities defensively for Indianapolis?
Oh, and we have. Their pass rush hasn't been good enough. They're not getting enough from Latu and Kwity Paye. Kwity had 2 sacks yesterday, but the linebackers are good at tackling. Their liabilities in coverage, which Zaire Franklin, he's really effective. He was all pro. When he's allowed to do what he does. And when you've got to do more things, not so much. The secondary, it's. I understand people bitching and moaning, and I do. We're up in the press box just making comments, but they're playing people who wouldn't be playing. That these guys are like, and they're playing their butts off and all this, but they're like your 6th or 7th corners. They just are. I mentioned all those guys, or I wrote in the story today of all the people that are out with Kenny Moore and Jalen Jones and Justin Whaley. I forgot Mike Hilton. He's out.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to be a battle apologist. I don't. But there is no way that any GM can provide this or the level of depth that covers up these injuries. Can't do it. And then you lose Mooney Ward, for crying out loud. It's when I saw the video of he and Drew Ogletree colliding, I flashed back to that. It's like a comedy thing where you got 2 ships in the ocean, in this big ocean, and they run into each other. That just told you how it was going to be difficult, because Mooney Ward was going to be on Marv Jr., who ended up getting hurt. But when you lose arguably your top defensive player in pregame warm-ups. Now, imagine the scrambling that goes on. So we've talked about it, and part of it's injury-related. The linebacker, in my mind, is because, as I said, there were like 8 things on the list to do in the offseason, and linebacker was one of them, and that's the one they didn't get to. Well, I'm glad they got to the other 7, and this is the one they didn't get to. But the pass rush bothers me because it's just not. It's not consistent. Brissett just had too much time, too many times. He escaped a couple of times. Quarterbacks do that. But that should have been a quarterback that you really smoked, and they didn't. And they're just not getting enough from the edge. Samson Ebukam, I'm not getting on him. He's coming back from an Achilles, for crying out loud. But you need more from your 2 first-round draft picks. And, pressures and this, that, and the other. Give me some sacks. These guys get paid for sacks. They do. They need more from it, and I think Latu's a great athlete, and he may end up being a really, really exceptional player. after 6 weeks, I don't want him having more interceptions than sacks. I just don't think that's a good thing.
Chap, when you look at Mike Chappell is our guest. He's on the Java House Peel and Port guest line. When you look at the line, like if you look defensively yesterday in general, they were led in tackles by Jermaine Pratt, who was an efficient day for him. But he also was a guy that was just acquired. Is that more so saying, hey, what a great signing, or is that more so saying that's problematic and it shows weakness elsewhere?
The latter. Because remember, and keep in mind, and this isn't to throw shade on Jermaine Pratt. He had 11 tackles for crying out loud with 3 practices. They had a chance to sign him when the Bengals cut him whenever it was 6 weeks ago or whatever. And the money, I think, was probably a little too steep. It was like $4 million guaranteed, whatever. And as Chris and Shane like to do, they really wanted to see more from their own guys. They did. They really believe in their own guys. But in this case, it hasn't worked out, and they're just susceptible to coverage. They just are. And so again, you're playing guys in positions or number of reps who normally shouldn't be doing that. And again, that's how it was in the secondary with Jonathan Edwards, an undrafted rookie, and Chris Lamont, who spent a lot of time on the practice squad, and Mekhi Blackmon, who was acquired in a trade early. So it's when you have that, it makes it tough, and then it makes things worse on the secondary when you're not pressuring the quarterback. So it was just, they found a way. That's the best way you can do it. I know people are saying, well, God, look who they've beaten. Well, you beat who you play. They should have beaten the Rams, and they should have lost to Denver, so things even out. But that's why I was watching some of the national shows today, and Teddy Bruschi doesn't believe in these guys at all. Maybe that's a little bit of the New England thing. I don't think this is a Super Bowl contender as it is, but once you get in, who knows? But I think it's a team that could do something in the playoffs, whatever something is. But right now they're first in the AFC South, which is step one. It is step one to getting a home game and getting in, and then we'll see. And the way the rest of the AFC has sort of floundered outside of Buffalo, and Kansas City's apparently getting itself back together in the Chargers. You just don't know what's there. Miami's is a dumpster fire. New England maybe, but it's right there for them to be in the thick of it all the way. The schedule gets tougher later on, but that's why we've all talked about this first part of the season, going into the game in Berlin with Atlanta. Holy smokes, you've got a chance to set yourself up for something, whatever that something is, and that's what they're doing.
Chap, this is, and maybe, I was going to say maybe it's not time for this conversation, but I don't know that there's ever, good time, bad time when it comes talking Colts, right? I mean, the reality is this. We should celebrate what this team is doing. They're 5-1. Daniel Jones has just been exceptional. I thought yesterday he showed a lot by, when there are a lot of quarterbacks that if they throw a pick or a pick six, they wilt. He continues to respond. But I'm curious, and I know that it's not his fault at times. It's just not. But is the Anthony Richardson contractual question starting to answer itself just based on the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, he seems to be a magnet to the bizarre and to the unfortunate?
And that's sad.
It is, really, but I mean, but at the same time, don't you? Again, it's not his fault at all, right? I mean, it's a totally bizarre fluke thing.
No, but
if I said to you, if I literally walked into Lucas Oil Stadium yesterday, an hour before the game, before any news had come out, and said, "Folks, I'm taking a survey. A player just had an orbital bone fracture because a rubber band during stretching snapped and came back and hit him right in the eye. Who is it?" 92 out of 100 people would say, well, it's got to be Anthony Richardson, right?
I know, and that's too bad. But aside from that, take that out of the mix. I was wrong. I'll say I was wrong. I would have gone with Richardson coming out of training camp. I really would have, because my pea brain thought they've got to figure out what they have. At the end of the season, they've got to know what they have in Richardson. Well, in my mind, as it turns out, they knew what they had. Whether it was at the end of last season, whether it was some March day when Shane Steichen was having a brew in the back porch, he decided that Jones, for so many reasons, was the right guy. This is before practices and all this stuff, and that Richardson wasn't. So, I think if this thing continues the way it is and they're knocking on the playoff door or the division title, whatever, boy, I think they find a way to go forward with Jones, and they find a way to move Richardson. I just don't see any path forward for Richardson here unless Jones gets hurt in the next couple of weeks and Richardson's, eye injury's okay.
Well, he's unavailable. I mean, Chap, do you remember?
Well, as I say,
yeah. I mean, do you remember when Reggie Miller, and I'm going back 30 years ago, I realize.
Yes.
But Reggie Miller had a similar injury. Now, one was listed as a break and one as a fracture. I'll get Ralph Reef on at some point this week to kind of verify or go through that. But that injury kept Reggie Miller out for a while. I mean, this is and you feel bad for him, right?
I think this keeps Richardson out for 2 or 3 weeks minimum.
Correct.
Because keep in mind that when you're playing, when you're practicing, you're jarring the body and your eyes and all this, and that's just that can't be even remotely good for a healing orbital bone fracture. It can't be. So, I just posted something today. I think they're going to look for a veteran, and it's not shade on Riley Leonard at all, but he was a 6th round pick, a developmental guy, has done everything right so far, but are you going to put a 5-1 team that can do some things in the hands of a 6th round draft pick? No, you're going to try to find somebody who as a veteran has played, knows what's going on, has no clue what your offense is. That's the downside. He'll come in stone cold. That worked. I mean, Joe Flacco did that. Maybe if this happened last week, you make a trade with Cleveland and bring Joe back here. I don't know. But I looked at the list of available quarterbacks, and it's not even remote. Oh, really, that guy? No, there's none of those guys. So, but I do think they'll do that, and just to be safe, because I did notice that Jones there's only been one season he's not missed a game with an injury, and that was in 2022. So, he tends to get hurt like quarterbacks do, and they've got to have somebody who can step in and at least run things competently, if that's the right word. I don't know if they can even do that on short notice, but I do think they'll have tryouts tomorrow, and I think we'll have a signing on Wednesday or Tuesday. I just do.
Chap, here's what's interesting to me about the quarterback position. Mike Chappell is our guest. I'm going to go back to one of my really bad analogies here. Okay, Chap? I have never.
Which one will this be?
I have a ton of my reels.
Yeah, okay.
I have my entire life, academically speaking, I couldn't get algebra. I just couldn't grasp algebra. That's true of most of us that are in the broadcast profession, by the way. But
probably why we're in the broadcast.
That's exactly right. But in order to grasp algebra, you first have to understand the basics of math. Long division, multiplication, and then they all interweave to become algebraic formula. If you don't know the basic steps of math, then you're never going to get algebra, okay? It seems to me like in the offensive scheme, the Colts right now are doing offensively things that we have not seen in this town with this franchise, some of it forever. But they are leading the league in scoring. They are efficient. They are working it in so many different ways. And Anthony Richardson was capable occasionally of the big algebraic type fancy play of like, how in the world did that just happen? But for the most part, it was the basic fundamental that was eluding him. And it feels to me like the reason the Colts offensively are where they are is because Daniel Jones mastered long division and multiplication. And that then allows Shane Steichen to occasionally pop in the algebraic formula to keep people guessing. But you had to start with the basics. And I think we all were looking at which quarterback was going to be the big play guy. and Steichen went with the guy that actually was the basic guy because that's the foundation he wanted to build off of. Does that make any sense?
Yes, and still giving you some big plays.
Correct. That's what I mean. They can mix that in now, right?
Right. It's kind of like when you're in school and in your head you could figure out what the answer was, so you put down 31. Well, they want to know why you get to 31, and sometimes I couldn't do it. In my head, I could tell you how I got to it.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you're right. And that's why I say when I didn't agree with what Shane Steichen did, and when he kept explaining it, he told us. He flat told us idiots, well, it's the free snap, it's operations, it's finding completions and all that stuff. And he was telling us. And some of our guys, some of the press guys got it, understood. And I was that dunce in the back room thinking, but, and I was looking more long term, and he was looking short term. And again, Chris Ballard told us this in whatever it was, January. We're going to bring another veteran, and well, does Anthony Richardson have the leg up? And we're going to go with a guy that helps us win games.
Does this make it, Chap, in the event? Let's say they go out and they sign now an off-the-beach veteran quarterback to be the backup because Anthony Richardson is unavailable. Does this allow for them perhaps to have, in the event, God forbid, you've got to go to that and play that player, does the fact that the offense is rooted in simplicity make it easier to transfer to a veteran quarterback if you need one to spell you for a game or two?
Well, I'd still rather have Anthony Richardson running my offense. If in 3 weeks he's ready to go and God forbid Daniel Jones gets hurt, I flip back to Richardson in a heartbeat.
I'm saying if Richardson's unavailable and you've got to go out and sign whoever,
no question.
Is there not as big a drop-off in the cohesiveness as we think?
Probably, because again, you're really gonna transition more to the people around the quarterback. Although it's going to be harder to run the ball with Taylor when everybody knows that's what you're going to try to do even more than you are now, because I'm still waiting for – he's leading the league in rushing, and I'm still waiting for his big game. I'm just still waiting for him to break out and just go bonkers. But yeah, the guy they bring in, whoever it is, it'll be someone who can run the basics and not get squirrely. And like a perfect example is second half, it was a 22-yard throw to Pierce on the left side that somehow got there through three defenders. And Steichen was telling us that during the week that he was talking to Jones, and Jones said, if we call this play, that play, and it was supposed to go to the right side, and he said, I tell you, if they give us this look on defense, I'm going to whip around and come back to Pierce. And he told Pierce, now listen, if I see that, be ready because it's coming to you. And that's what he did. And that's where he's playing chess. And maybe other quarterbacks can't do that. But that just shows you that this, you always hear about guys at first in, last out and doing the homework. And we've heard countless stories now. That's Jones. It's Manning-esque and Luck-esque of what they're doing. It was funny. Zach Kiefer was at the game. I was getting on him for being a bandwagon jumper coming in week 6 when they're winning. But he asked Jones about, what do you do? Are you one of those guys that, you're locked in once the season starts? He said, do you have any hobbies? And he sort of said no. He said, most guys don't have hobbies during the season because you're working. And when you're at the office and you're working, you go home and you spend time at night. So that's what you want. It's not, glamorous and all this. When remember Manning's, the Manning cave and all that. There's so much truth to that.
Hey, listen, Chap, I just saw
people out with that.
I mentioned this earlier, and I could pull up the direct quotes, but to paraphrase it, Tua down in Miami, after the Dolphins season has gone awry, he finally just said the quiet part out loud and was like, look, we got guys that are not showing up for meetings. We got guys that are late. It's got to be across the board, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the quarterback calling out the roster for not being on time. And maybe it's too late or too late in this case. But the point being, that's the stuff you're talking about, right? You need that example at the very front of guys falling in line, and it appears as though with this roster that's the case. Now, let me ask you this. Yesterday, there were a number of players that caught passes from Daniel Jones. A.D. Mitchell was a scratch at the beginning of the year. Is this a continuation of the discipline, or are we starting to see the beginning of the end?
No, it's two things. Not those two things, but it's an extension of the discipline, if you want to call it that. But it's also a reflection that Alec Pierce was active again.
Well, I understand, but I mean, Mitchell's been on the field in games where, Alec Pierce hadn't been hurt all year, and there were games where Alec Pierce was.
No, but when Pierce was out there and Mitchell was out there, they really had to find ways to get Mitchell on the field. One game he was on there for like 9 snaps because Pierce hardly comes off the field. He and Pittman are out there all the time. So no, I think it was. They're not even remotely ready to give up on A.D. Mitchell. He's got so much talent. But at some point though, it's like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, you got to see it at some point, right? Like he has that. Like
but you see just enough of it to where you think, maybe. But it's the mess ups that you just had. At some point, the mess ups overcome or outweigh the talent. We're not there remotely. I've talked to Reggie enough to know that he believes in Mitchell, but he also understands, this is a bottom line game. We were talking in the press room, and I really wonder that barring injury, although guys get injured, but if Pierce, Pittman, and Downs stay healthy, I don't know when Mitchell gets back on the field. I don't know when he's a healthy. I don't know. And also the problem is he doesn't play special teams at all. He's never played a special team snap. So to have a guy on your roster when roster spots are so precious on game day, and with the idea that, unless the guy gets there, this guy's not playing. He's like your backup quarterback. There's 2 guys that aren't going to play. So, my interesting thing I'd like to know, and we won't know except later on, is will Mitchell use this being a healthy scratch as motivation? Like, hey guys, I belong on this team. I deserve it. Or does he pout and
right?
And I think that's a very valid question. I don't think Reggie will allow the latter. He's too much of a taskmaster. I think he's a player's coach, but he's also demanding. So that's such an interesting thing.
Well, I mean, my point being, no matter the guy could be Usain Bolt, Carl Lewis, and Edwin Moses all wrapped into one with Jerry Rice's hands. But if he is buried on the depth chart to the point where he is a healthy scratch, right, midway, at some point you got to say, okay, then when is it going to come? You know what I mean?
And we're down. We're way. I think we're way far away from that. But the whole thing is it's a matter of trust. Good old Billy Joel song. It's a matter of trust when the coach and the quarterback. When do because they'll say the right things. We trust him. He's working hard and all this. But Peyton Manning said you earn your catches on Sunday by what you do in practice. If the quarterback doesn't trust you, although this would be a case that you don't trust what he does during the game. But if the quarterback doesn't trust you, if the coach doesn't trust you, if the quarterback doesn't trust you, then how do you get back on the field barring injury? And I don't see that path right now. But now, will he be inactive the last 11 games? I would say no, just because again guys get hurt. But I tell you, they played those 3 receivers almost exclusively yesterday. Ashton Doodle was on the field for as many defensive plays, 1, as offensive plays, 1. So they're using 2 tight ends a lot, and of course Tyler Warren's sort of almost a receiver.
He's whatever they want him to be. You know what I mean?
He's fun to watch.
He is.
I compare him to Dallas Clark, but he does more than Dallas Clark. He just does. God love him. Dallas Clark didn't block like this. Tyler Warren is a combination of Jack Doyle and Dallas Clark. You watch some of those runs from Taylor, and he does Jack Doyle things in the line where he's smacking guys around. And there's still, I'm sure there's still more of what they can do. But when you talk to Reggie sometimes, and he says, he's taken away some targets from my receivers, which is a good thing. It really is. It should open things up. But those receivers better understand that there may be 1 or 2 targets a game that maybe they used to get. It goes to the young tight end now.
Tyler Warren is, again, he's one of the key cogs that kind of makes everything float off of that. There was another play that I thought had a marquee moment that was very telling about what makes this Colts team different. I'll get into that in just a couple of minutes. Mike Chappell, appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you next week, all right?
You guys be well. See you.
Mike Chappell of CBS 4 and WXIN, Fox 59 on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. I mentioned it. There was one guy, one play yesterday that I thought jumped out, and I'm like, that right there, that's what makes this group a little bit different and why things are working as they are. I will tell you that, and I asked your thoughts, your words in 6 words or fewer on this year's Colts season. I'll read you some of the best of those, and we'll open up the phone lines as well at 239-1070. Even Terry, who wants to talk IU, will bring it in. It's a loaded Monday here on The Fan. There was a key first down that the Colts got yesterday that I thought really kind of exemplified who and what they are in 2025. Not that it hasn't been the case all season or all, last season in particular about this guy, but I'll get into that in a second. But I did ask yesterday, give me 6 words or fewer to describe your thoughts on the Colts through the 2025 season. I do this after each and every game. And some of the better answers that I received, and there were a ton of them that I got, okay? Hoosier in Kentucky says, offensive, Super Bowl. Defensive, first overall pick. I don't know if that's 6 words or not. I didn't count them up. Tom, surprisingly optimistic, but readying for heartbreak. I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. Brian, surprisingly fun to watch. I thought this was a good one from Terps161 on the X Post Twitter. Reclamation quarterback delivers us Lombardi. That might be a little aggressive, but we shall see, right? This from Jason. AR injuries continue. You do feel bad for Anthony Richardson, but he is just a magnet for the bizarre. Doug says, count on liking this season. Now, that used to be for years. It was count on losing this Sunday. Count on liking this season. This one from Grant. We are winning the Super Bowl. Okay. I mean, at this point, they're the number 1 seed in the AFC. They're tied with, and which is the bigger surprise, that the Colts are tied for the best record in the league, or the fact that they are tied with Tampa? 2 quarterbacks that are both getting second leases on life and making the most of it, obviously, in Baker Mayfield and what you are seeing from Daniel Jones and the Colts. This from Bill. Their defense is offensive. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. There was a play where Jonathan Taylor got loose. And in watching it, because I'll be honest, I had to watch the game yesterday. I had to go back and rewatch it. I was in Denver over the weekend, and so I didn't see the game. I was following it, and then I went back last night and rewatched the game, and which is a good way to do it, because obviously you can, I guess when you watch it live now in today's day, you can sit there and rewind and everything else. But I saw one thing, and I thought, am I seeing what I think here? And I'll give Chris Ballard credit, because I think that, and I'm the first to admit I was one of them. I was really cynical about Ballard and down on him at times, because I thought he was building a football team in the wrong fashion. And it's almost like Chris Ballard just held on to those acid-washed Lee jeans long enough that eventually they came back in style. But the narrative of the big bruising offensive line and then a running back, I mean, that felt like such a mid-'80s style of football. But Tyler Warren changes so many things. But I saw a play where they needed a first down, and Jonathan Taylor had what normally would be a routine run. But once he started to spring and probably would have gotten a 2 or 3 yard gain, ahead of him was Quentin Nelson blazing a path 4 yards in front of him. And he had one player to get past in order to even be able to then run behind Quentin Nelson. And there was an opening for him because Bortolini had his guy sealed off. Tyler Warren, who appears to just love contact, came over and then slid alongside Bortolini to seal off for Taylor. But there was one defensive lineman for Arizona, I can't remember which one, that was about to basically make the stop. It was the last barrier between Jonathan Taylor and then getting up behind the comfort of the running wall of Quentin Nelson and getting a first down. And that player Not to say that Taylor could not have broken that tackle, but that player was then sealed off because of a flash in at the last second from Michael Pittman Jr. Michael Pittman, who has been battling through a back injury a year ago, who has been durable, who I think that a lot of people thought that his value was in simply being some sort of a stretch receiver. But Michael Pittman Jr., amongst all of those things, giving himself up and sliding over, and all of a sudden this running play that you're seeing for Jonathan Taylor was an orchestration of all of these pieces coming together and knowing exactly where they needed to be. And it was a little thing that turned a little play into a bigger play and a chunk play that extended a drive. And that's kind of the Shane Steichen mantra in the fact that, in Chris Ballard as well, everything like you kind of start from the inside and then expand it outward. And that particular play, I thought, showed everybody collectively not worrying about who was getting the glitz, the glamour, and the glory of that play, but rather being where they needed to be. And if one person's out of position, that play doesn't work. But everybody was exactly where they needed to be, and the cohesiveness of them all working together is what made that play operate and the Colts extended drive. And that's what this team has been all about. It's not unlike what you watch out of Indiana on Saturday. I mean, you literally have, in this town right now, you literally have a college team and a pro team that are like playing mirrored off one another in the same style, in just a collection of players that are like, my job on this play is to do this. And I'm not worried about like who gets the big headline on this play. I mentioned Indiana. Terry has been patiently waiting. We're way over, but I'm going to take him anyway. Patiently waiting to talk IU football. What's up, Terry?
Hey, Jake. Thanks for taking the call.
Thank you for your patience, by the way.
And sorry for carrying an older subject into the current subject, but it truly is just unfathomable how we can be where we are. So much so that we don't really even know how to act.
You're talking about IU, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's funny, Terry. What's funny is this. Here's what's funny, Terry. When you say that, I mean, I knew that because I can see the screener that you were calling in to talk about IU. When you call in to say, I can't believe we're in this position with this record for this football team, and whoever would have guessed that, the beauty of it is you could have been talking about either one of them, the Colts or IU, right? But stick with IU. Go ahead.
Yeah. So about 3 years ago, it came to my desk or to my awareness that of IU's history with losses. You think, and so I called in to give you that fact that IU was the losingest Division I football team in the history of college football.
Correct.
And do you think that prior to the hire for Cignetti, that Cignetti would occasionally sit around and ponder, I'm such a badass, I could take the worst team in Division I and be a champion, and he Googled it. And what do you find?
Now, here's the thing, Terry.
Indiana is the worst team.
Now, here's the thing, Terry. I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to do it by explaining why exactly you just perfectly led me into the segue of where it goes from here. And I don't think Cignetti Googled that, but I think there's something else in play that you're onto. And I will explain exactly what I'm talking about on the other side. So, Shane Steichen's take on several things from yesterday we will play for you coming up in just a little bit, including that of the quarterback situation and what we know, and I think we knew this last night, but, Anthony Richardson going to miss multiple games. Not that he is playing, but you get what I'm saying there. And if you're just joining us, Mike Chappell mentioned earlier the fact that he thought that the Colts would go out and get themselves a veteran quarterback, sign one. No disrespect to Riley Leonard. But again, backup quarterbacks are like donut tires. If you can use them for an exit or two, that's cool. If you try to maintain your exact voyage on the interstate all the way through with one, then you realize why they are the donut tire or the backup. But in terms of Indiana and what Terry mentioned, I want to get back into this. And I've thought about this from several angles. And I realize, the immediate association to Curt Cignetti in the Penn State job. Penn State parting ways with James Franklin after their loss. They have now lost 3 straight. The loss to Oregon at home in overtime is relatively excusable, if you will, unless you're Penn State, I guess. But then the other 2 losses, getting blown out at UCLA and losing to Northwestern, and enough was enough after 12 years, James Franklin out. Now, this is a coach that, if you think about it, of late was within a half of playing for a national championship game, in a national championship game. But, it's all about recency, and especially at a place like Penn State. Curt Cignetti is a Pennsylvania native. Curt Cignetti has coached at 3 different colleges in the state of Pennsylvania. He played collegiately at West Virginia. He grew up in the Pittsburgh area. And one would assume that Curt Cignetti, growing up, whether or not he was a Penn State fan growing up, I don't know. I don't know that answer. But when you grow up in Pennsylvania, it is impossible to not know of the power of the brand of Penn State football. And having nothing to do with some of the cloud of what has happened at Penn State, the reality is this: even if the scandal at Penn State had never happened and Joe Paterno had simply retired, the reality is when you have a coach that is larger than life, at Florida, you have, if you go to Florida, are you trying to live up to Urban Meyer or are you trying to live up to Steve Spurrier? If you go to Alabama now, you obviously are trying to live up to Nick Saban, but there's also Bear Bryant there. Different schools have different, and I realize that Indiana, from a basketball standpoint, Branch McCracken was a great and successful coach, and there was a basketball program in Indiana of success long before Bob Knight ever stepped foot in Bloomington, Indiana. But nonetheless now, from a basketball standpoint, Indiana, since Bob Knight's departure, Indiana has yet to ever hire a coach that was their first. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe Archie Miller was the one guy they went after, where they just said, we're going after this guy and we're going to get him. But outside of that, and that was one that was just a bizarre thing in general. He's like Gerald Ford. Like, it's like this administration you almost forget about. You're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. But Indiana has had, when they've gone after their big fish hire, Brad Stevens notably, they have not been able to bring it in for whatever reason. And Brad Stevens is a guy that grew up in Indiana, knew of the power of Indiana basketball, the branding of Indiana basketball, coached at a smaller school in Indiana, coached in Indiana, et cetera, right? And with all of that, still, and I realize the Boston Celtics is a lot different than where he is, right? And so but the reality is this. I think Curt Cignetti with Penn State, and I think Penn State fans assume that the lure of Penn State is going to immediately bring in like a Cignetti. All they got to do is make that phone call and he's going to come. Well, he's making roughly 9 at Indiana. Penn State will probably pay up to like 50. Let's say Penn State says we got a 5-year, $75 million deal. First off, I think Matt Rule is going to be their first choice. He played at Penn State. He's tight with the athletic director. He's turned around programs. But even if Cignetti was their guy, the point that Terry makes, I think the challenge and the pride, Curt Cignetti's wired differently. Curt Cignetti is wired in such a way that I don't think he's an easy road guy. And what he's done at Indiana is remarkable, and I think he takes pride in the fact that Indiana is his. He can be Indiana's Joe Paterno. And I think he knows that, and it's for that reason that I don't think that Penn State lures him away. I think Indiana, if you want an explanation on why Cignetti is not going to end up in Happy Valley, he may, but if he doesn't, Indiana fans can take a little bit of a sigh or a deep breath of looking at it and saying, well, why has Brad Stevens not come to Indiana? It's very similar. Big news in the AFC South, and we'll let you hear what Shane Steichen had to say yesterday next. footing. And then you begin to wonder, is it the franchise? Is it the coaching? Is it the quarterback? Whatever it may be. And Jones, and I think that we in our minds think to ourselves, this is a guy that went straight from a bad situation in New York, came into one in Indianapolis. It seems to be a good fit. They got tons of weapons around him. They've got a very good offensive line. Tyler Warren is a centerpiece in terms of what they want to do offensively. But we forget Daniel Jones in the intermediary did have a stop in Minnesota as well in watching the Vikings a year ago and being there. And I think that there is part of what he saw in Minneapolis that transferred to Indianapolis.
Just the level of detail that they operated under, I think, just so specific about, what looks we're getting this week, where's the answer, how do we recognize it, how do we walk through it, how do we prepare to see it, having quick answers on what if this happens, what if that happens. I mean, all the situations that could come up in a game. They were, KO, Grant, Josh, and then Sam, and all the quarterbacks were constantly quizzing each other and checking and making sure that they're ready to go for whatever the defense could do.
And again, the most important part of that. Play again for me, Corbin, the very first thing he said, the first 3 seconds of this sound clip of Daniel Jones talking about what he witnessed in Minnesota.
Just the level of detail that they operated under, I think, just so specific about, what looks we're getting this week. Where's
Bingo, right there. The attention to detail. I don't know. Did he not have that in New York? I don't know. But this simply is working in terms of the relationship, whether or not Daniel Jones learned that on the job, whether or not Daniel Jones has always had that and didn't have it about himself, and didn't have it in New York, I don't know. But I mention this all the time. Sometimes there is more to it than what we realize on the surface. And when Shane Steichen tabbed Daniel Jones as his starting quarterback, I think there is more to it than at the time we knew. The first being, do we know when Anthony Richardson was handed the keys as a young player that Shane Steichen made that decision, or that Chris Ballard even made that decision? Or was there a mandate there? And we can look back now and say that probably was premature, because what you did was you handed the keys and you had in the driver's seat a player that, at no fault of his, didn't have the experience or the maturity to understand attention to detail. And when they tried to send the message of attention to detail, was that fully supported and backed up? And then when Shane Steichen announced Daniel Jones as the starter, I think there were a lot of us, myself included, that thought perhaps that was simply another wake-up call to try to get Anthony Richardson going, when in reality what it was Shane Steichen was looking at this football team and at this roster and at the new additions and Tyler Warren and everything else, and he was saying the missing ingredient here isn't even necessarily the making the immediate throw, making the layups, being able to go through all the progressions and reads. The missing ingredient here is the attention to every detail and the understanding of the importance of that, of being able to always have the right play, how to get out of a bad play, how to turn a bad play into at least we got by on second down and didn't lose 5 yards play. And I think that he was able to see that existed within Daniel Jones, partially because of the journey that Daniel Jones has been on. And it absolutely is working now. And what is amazing to me is the fact that we have gone from the beginning of the year looking at the schedule and trying to figure out exactly what the Colts' record was going to be by figuring out which games they could win. And now you look at it, and yeah, there's a little bit of obviously a danger and looking at it, and a boredom of looking at it and going, okay, let's do schedule predictions and record predictions, whatever else. But when you look at it now, you start to look at it and you go, where are the losses going to come? I mean, we're starting to now, through 6 games, figure out who's good and who's not. And when you look at it, you're okay, there's a challenge this week against the Chargers. But is there? Because their O-line has not been great. The Colts, the one thing the Colts, if there is a deficiency, they're not getting to opposing quarterbacks with much frequency. But nonetheless, the offensive line for the Chargers is not great. You can get to Justin Herbert and interrupt him a little bit. Then you go to Tennessee, which we just talked about is now, well, Tennessee actually comes here, but I'm saying you get Tennessee at home. They're a complete dumpster fire. They're looking for a new head coach. They got a rookie quarterback. It's a disaster, right? Atlanta, well, you got Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's another one that it's like, are the Steelers good? I don't know. Are the Steelers good? They must be, because look at them. They're leading their division. Aaron Rodgers is not necessarily like, 15 years ago Aaron Rodgers, but he's playing pretty well. DK Metcalf is doing some DK Metcalf things at times. But then after that, who jumps out at you? Kansas City, okay. Does San Francisco at home scare you at this point? Okay. And then, lo and behold, they are the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they may well be holding on to that for a while, so long as they stay healthy. And the Colts are playing, and by the way, I was incorrect earlier. I apologize. Yes, Purdue is ranked number 1. It is not Rob Blackmon that is joining us later in the program, coming up about 15 minutes from now, but we're going inside the Colts locker room, correct, Corbin?
That is right.
Would you like to embellish on that? Or elaborate, I should say?
Mekhi Blackmon is going to join us at 2:30, Jay.
Okay, Mekhi Blackmon joining us bottom of the hour. So we'll get a better glimpse into the mood, the atmosphere of the Colts in general. But the thing being here, the Colts, to me, there are like 2 parallel stories right now in Indiana when it comes to football. One is the Colts and the other is IU. Because what Indiana did over the weekend at Oregon was Indiana right now. If the Indianapolis Colts are the surprising number 1 seed in the AFC, the reality is this. The Indiana Hoosiers of Curt Cignetti may well be the best team in college football. They might. I know they're ranked 3rd, and I know Miami's got an impressive win, winning at home over Notre Dame, and Miami's is very, very good. And Ohio State is obviously elite. Ohio State's offense is as good as anybody. Ohio State defensively in the red zone is as good as anybody. I get it. But right now, in terms of body of work, the most impressive college football win of the 2025 season belongs to the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana going in and winning at Oregon. And not just winning, but doing it in the same way as kind of the Colts have won, of precision, like Daniel Jones was talking about. You could take sound clips of the Colts talking about their approach to games, of the Colts talking about what they do over the course of games. You could take those clips and say that it's an Indiana football player talking about IU, and you would say, that's right. Because they're winning in similar fashion. They're going out, they're precise, they are controlling lines of scrimmage. They're controlling in the trenches. And in Indiana's case, what Indiana did to me that was so impressive was Indiana went in and they out-pizzazzed Oregon. Indiana flew to the football. Indiana was faster than Oregon. Indiana was more aggressive than Oregon. Indiana's linebackers were more tenacious than Oregon's. Indiana ran and punched between the tackles more than Oregon. Indiana's quarterback, when needed to be so, was more precise than Oregon's. And Oregon's is very good. But they went in to that atmosphere where so many teams go in and struggle. And they went in against a team that has been as much style as anybody in college football. But they've got substance to back it up, does Oregon. Even though they have not won a national title. They've been right there in the mix for a while now. But Oregon is all about the Nike money, the glitz, the glamour, all of it. The Duck with his fancy sign making fun of the Indy 500. I thought it was funny, actually. But with all of that, it was Indiana, nondescript, non-sexy, efficient Indiana that went into Oregon and controlled the latter part of that game. And I thought you could and listen, when Indiana had to go, they had multiple drives in that game, did Indiana, in a raucous, hostile environment where they responded, and Mendoza showed the kind of composure that has him right there in the argument, in the discussion for the Heisman. And I said earlier, I thought the play of the game in that game in Eugene came, and I think it was in the either late first or early second quarter. Mendoza looks to the side. They need a first down. He completes it to Cooper, who makes an unbelievable one-handed catch. I mean, it was a great catch. The one-handed nature of the catch alone was impressive. But he makes that one-handed catch. And then, and this is where Indiana is different. It's what makes Daniel Jones and what he said about what he learned in Minnesota different. And it's what makes what the Colts are doing translatable and transferable to what Indiana's doing. Omar Cooper Jr. makes this unbelievable one-handed catch, but then he comes down, he's right on the sideline, and he knows he needs like 3 or 4 more yards to get the first down. So he makes the one-handed catch, he comes down, he makes a spin move, gets an extra dive, and gets the first down and keeps the drive going. And it's that attention to detail. It's that awareness. It's that vision that is different than most teams. And that comes down to preparation. That comes down to dedication. That comes down to coaching. And that comes down to a brand and a mantra that is why Indiana 2 years ago was doing finger snaps and singing fight songs at a whisper to celebrate a 4-overtime win over Akron. And now they have the highest ranking in the history of the program. And it's turned around that quickly. And it's the best story right now in college football, and it might be the best story in Indianapolis sports, and that's with the professional sports team, one of their players of which is going to join us in under 10 minutes. It comes with that I mean, it eclipses the fact that the Colts might be the best team right now in the NFL, and the best team in college football may well be the Indiana Fighting Hoosiers. John joins us on the program at 239-1070. What's up, John?
Hey there. I heard something interesting. Neuheisel, CBS Sports was at the Oregon-Indiana game, and post-game they interviewed Cignetti, and Neuheisel asked Cignetti, what did he tell Mendoza when he threw that pick six? And Cignetti said, I went up to him and I asked him if he was having fun. And I think that tells a lot about the coach. He realized at 20-20, he needed more from Mendoza. He needed him not to wilt, and he needed him to perform for the remainder of the game. And he asked him if he was having fun.
I just think, John, and we don't know, right? We've been able to watch Curt Cignetti here for, 19 games at Indiana? And anybody that says that they watched him game in and game out at James Madison, I mean, did anybody in Indiana really do that? So we're still getting to know him, but so too are his players, probably to an extent. But he seems to always know which button to push, right? And that's, John, that's the key to it, right? Is there's nothing about Cignetti is enigmatic because when you look at him, he doesn't look like the in-your-face Lombardi type coach, right? But from a scheme standpoint, a belief standpoint, in every area of it so far, he has been able to push every button. And I think he loves the challenge. I think he's a challenge guy. He challenged Mendoza right there. I think he loves the challenge. I think he also loves the challenge of maintaining what he's built at Indiana, and his name's going to be circled elsewhere, and I don't think he has any interest in it. I think he's the long-term guy at Indiana, and I'm telling you right now, they may be the best team in college football. And he did. It is one of the most remarkable stories that we've seen in college football, period. And by the way, speaking of rankings, Purdue, number 1, college basketball preseason polls are out, and the Boilermakers and Matt Painter are number 1 in the land. As for the Colts, big win yesterday. They sit right now atop the AFC in terms of seeding. If the playoffs began today, which they don't, the Colts would be the number 1 seed. But one of the guys that's been a big part of that, and he plays in a unit that has really had to dig down deep. Mekhi Blackmon joins us next. terms of that defensive backfield that they continue to have to play through. And obviously you had that yesterday with the news with Shavarius Ward before the game, Mooney Ward getting the concussion. And it is a unit that has been continued to have to dig further and further down to make plays. And it can't be easy, but I've always felt like that is one area, that one unit, if you will, in the defensive backfield where, you know, you see guys that can be plugged in at both running back and defensive back are the two positions I've always felt like you can kind of go in and get by on instinct or just overall feel because you're less reliant necessarily on all of the guys that are lining directly alongside you. Like an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman, I think, are very reliant on familiarity of teammate around you. And, you know, the Colts have had to this year, and I've been critical of Chris Ballard in a lot of areas. But one area where I have to give him some credit is, you know, a year ago when it came to his corners and his safeties, when he just said, look, I got to see these guys play. I'm not going to know what I have until I see them play. And he did have injury with some of those guys. Juju Brents comes to mind. But I think he essentially was able to say, okay, I saw them play now, and I've seen them play enough to know that we had to go kind of, you know, and shore things up. And yes, I saw enough of the guys that I had to know that, in fact, we've got to go a different way and go shopping. And that's how you end up with Mooney Ward. That's how you end up with Cam Bynum. And truthfully, that's how you end up with Mekhi Blackmon, who they made the deal for to get him out of Minnesota. And sometimes it's good to bring in differing opinion, differing viewpoint, because you can get guys that come in that, you know, was it by design when Daniel Jones came in and we heard what Daniel Jones had to say about playing in Minnesota? Look, this was a franchise in Minnesota that had attention to detail. This is a franchise. What I saw in Minnesota was a group that was locked down and had every single little aspect of each week, attention to detail covered. Now, does that mean that did that have a factor in why, okay, let's that mentality, that footprint of what they are, we've got to get other guys and bring that in. Did Daniel Jones share that? And Chris Ballard's like, okay, so then therefore I'm comfortable with getting a guy and making a trade for a guy like Blackmon who's coming from there. You know, I don't know. I don't know if that was a factor or not. But I think it's interesting that Shane Steichen so adamantly preached the importance of that detail, and now they're getting contribution from guys that are coming from an organization that detail was important and was a key ingredient to what made Minnesota a year ago successful. And then the other thing, and this is a conversation for a much further down the way road, but the other thing that comes into play or that is of interest is if you look at Minnesota a year ago with that in Sam Bradford and the reclamation project that was Sam Bradford, they still decided to go in another direction. And yes, they had a young quarterback in the wings in J.J. McCarthy who they had to get healthy. And Bradford's playing well in Seattle now. And so the Colts themselves, I think with each passing week, we are seeing more and more the cement of the fact that that is not going to be of question when it comes to the future of Daniel Jones. But who knows? Do the Colts look at it at the end of the year and say, okay, this is a Sam Bradford situation. We got this far, but we feel like we have somebody that we can plug in this. I don't think that's going to be the case. What this guy's doing in the composure, and Daniel Jones is fascinating to me because after games, the guy seems like he's like 2 aspirins from a coma. Like he comes in as just very even keel, doesn't seem to be a huge rah-rah, build-him-up guy. But the approach that he's had and then the ability to go out and bounce back from adversity in game. It's one thing to have adversity and have a week to come back from it. But it's another to have adversity and have a drive to have to come back from, like the next possession. To play possession to possession, that is in itself a challenge, right? And so I think Jones, when you look at it, you've got to give him a ton of credit for the fact that is, there's a professionalism there that just comes from being that goldfish. And so far, it's masterful and the way that it has worked. And I never thought I would say this. I never thought at the beginning of the year I would say it. And 6 games does not a season make. They're not even a third of the way through the year. But right now, Daniel Jones is right in the mix and in the discussion for MVP conversation in the National Football League. And if you're the Giants, or for that matter, the Vikings, you got to be looking at it going, how do we let this guy get out the door? Is he Joe Montana? Probably not. Is he Tom Brady? Probably not. Is he Andrew Luck? Probably not. Is he Patrick Mahomes? Probably not. But he's really solid. And what the Colts have done is built a very solid foundation around him and give him the weapons that are necessary. And yeah, Tyler Warren, we probably haven't talked enough about him today. I could probably do 3 hours tomorrow doing nothing but talking about Tyler Warren and the ability to put him in different spots, put him in different areas, get the touchdown pass to him, use him as a blocker, opening up holes for Jonathan Taylor, pulling with Quentin Nelson. All of those things are enabled and facilitated by the fact that Tyler Warren is on the field. And if you're just joining us on the show today, the other big news in the NFL today is the fact that Tennessee, and it's notable because of the fact that Tennessee is within the AFC South. Brian Callahan out in Tennessee. And that could theoretically set back Tennessee for a while because you have a young quarterback, a number 1 overall pick, and I'm telling you, it is so important to have stability around a young player like that. And for Cam Ward, it's Trevor Lawrence with Urban Meyer and that fiasco all over again, where you're looking at it and you're like, look, I'm trying to figure out where I want to be here and what I want to be. And now all of a sudden I got to go through a coaching change 6 games into my NFL career. The hell are we doing? And the other big story is that of the AP Top 25 preseason college basketball poll. Yeah, I get it. Jake, preseason polls, what does that mean? I get it. There's always a couple of teams in the preseason top 25. Who were the top 2 teams in the preseason college football poll? Texas and Penn State. One just found their way back into the top 25, and the other is cruising LinkedIn for a coach. So take with a grain of salt the preseason top 25. But nonetheless, not a huge surprise, of course. But back where they have belonged for the last couple of years, that dynamic trio, Trey Kaufman-Wren, Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, amongst others, Matt Painter's Purdue Boilermakers are the number 1 team in college basketball. The number 1 team in the land in the preseason top 25, Purdue. And yes, they're going to have a target on their back, but you know what? We talked about it with Mike DeCourcy last week. I think Braden Smith likes that. It's funny because Braden Smith's a guy that was basically off radar for the better part of his coming of age as a basketball player, and now on radar doesn't seem to bother him at all. And what Matt Painter has done is incredible because in the transfer portal NIL era, Purdue basketball has had this stability year in and year out where you know every year the faces may change, the names may change, but the blueprint and the style stays the same. And to be able to maintain a cohesive core in today's era is remarkable and rare. I mean, rare. You just don't see it. You don't see it in today's day. But yet Matt Painter has this, and I go back to what I talked about with Mike DeCourcy. I remember a couple of years ago, marquee player, Purdue was in the discussion to land said player. Then all of a sudden, Purdue was like nowhere to be found in recruiting said player. And I asked him, This player is allegedly interested in Purdue, but Purdue doesn't seem to have reciprocal interest. And the response I got back was, that's because that is a handout, pay-for-play kid, and we don't want any part of it. And that goes back to culture. Joining us now on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line, he had yesterday his second interception in as many games for the Colts. Mekhi Blackmon, the cornerback for Indianapolis, joining us on the show. Mekhi, how are you?
I'm doing good. What about you?
Listen, man, like the whole city, like a cloud nine here, right? And the fact that
I know.
Let me ask you something. Be honest. If I would have told you at the time that you found out you were going to be an Indianapolis Colt, that through 6 games you were going to be the number 1 seed in the AFC, you would have said what to me?
I would have said, I believe you.
That's why you're there, right?
Yeah, I would have said, I believe you.
What about it? Aside from the obvious, which is, hey, if you play there, you got to believe. I get that, right? But what is it? What is it that has managed to have everything come together like this?
I would say just in my short time here, you could tell the coaches, the support staff, everybody is close, tight-knit. So, even pregame with us just, going around, shaking everybody up in the team room, I would say that's a big part of it. That's the first time I kind of seen people, interact that way. So I would say just the group being tight-knit, nobody want to let anyone down. Everybody trying to do their job to the best of their ability, for the person that they playing with. So I would say that's the main part.
When you talk about the locker room in general, I want to go back to yesterday before the game. And just, if you could, for us and for fans, explain just kind of the mindset of the bizarre nature of Anthony Richardson getting hurt in the locker room, Mooney Ward getting hurt on the field, and having to kind of process all of that and then go out and play.
Yeah, you can't really script it any crazier than that. That's something I've never seen before. But like I said, we have a tight-knit group. Everybody trusts everybody regardless of the situation. Those 2 guys went down, unfortunately. But, we kind of got the guys, that were next in line. Everybody has to step up and do their job. So I feel like we did that yesterday. We came out with the win. So just hoping those guys get healthy as soon as possible.
Daniel Jones said after the game, Mekhi Blackmon is our guest on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. He said after the game that when he was in Minnesota, the thing that most impressed him about what he learned with the Vikings was the attention to detail. And just within that franchise, and you get it, you were there. Can you elaborate on that and how you have been able to see that in Indianapolis?
I just feel like even Daniel, before he went to Minnesota, I feel like he was a guy, that took that detailed process. But I feel like the quarterback situation over there in Minnesota, they kind of handle it similar to how DJ's process is here. So, I would just say it goes hand in hand. DJ is a guy who he wants to be prepared and, be in the best position for the team because he is our leader and our quarterback. So I would say that's just kind of the guy he is of wanting to, do everything the right way and have things done on time and on schedule.
How challenging has it been as a unit for the defensive backfield to not have continuity at the fault of nobody? Due to attrition and injury in general, right? And Jalen Jones being out, the different injuries you guys have had to deal with, Mekhi. How challenging is that?
I guess that's what makes the NFL so special. We signed a guy this past week that he wound up playing a lot of snaps. It's just, just kind of getting everybody communicating. Like I said, we still have a close-knit group. We bring the guys along. I've only been here six weeks myself. So I would say even me just getting, caught up, and I'm kind of the guy who's looked at as an older guy now, and I've only been here 6 months. So guys coming in, I'm trying to get those guys caught up as well. Like I said, next man up mentality, regardless of if somebody goes down, gets hurt, is out. I guess we kind of all, had that mindset as a team.
Okay, lastly, before we let you go, Mekhi, I've got to ask you this. You finished your college career at USC, right? You started at Colorado, you finished at USC, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to know this. Which is more bizarre for you? To still think that USC now is a Big Ten team, or to think that the Big Ten champions are going to be the Indiana Fighting Hoosiers?
So I feel like you're trying to bait me into something, but
no.
I would just say fight on and go bust to both. I'm not going to get into the, USC is my alma mater. Y'all got a few teams that we play against in Indiana and Notre Dame and stuff like that. So I don't know, man.
How about those Hoosiers? Come on, you give up some love for Indiana, though, Mekhi. Come on.
You guys are playing. You guys are playing real good football right now. So that's congrats to you guys. I guess I'm an Indiana Hoosier fan now.
I like that. I like that. Well, listen. So too are the Colts, playing great football. Obviously, right now at 5-1. Big pick yesterday. That was a huge part of the game. Certainly appreciate the time today. Congratulations, and we will get you on to work now, getting ready for the Chargers.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
All right, Mekhi Blackmon joining us on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. Way over. John is in. We will hand it off to him. We'll do it. Brought to you by Love Heating and Air next. By the way, appreciate everybody that wrote in. I don't know what name I said when I was talking about Sam Darnold from Minnesota. I think I said Sam Bradford. I have no idea why that name would have come to mind, but
8 is enough.
What's that?
Weren't they the Bradfords?
That's right. Sacramento, California, baby. J&B has arrived. It is time for the crossover, the handoff, brought to you by Love Heating and Air. Love-HVAC.com is the website. Big show lined up, John?
What we got? Stephen Holder and Matt Surface, former Hoosier, going to join us with IU. I went to the Hyper today and played a little hoop at noon.
Did you really?
I did. And it was very Hyper-esque because it took me forever to park, and then I had to pay like $10 to stay there for like 50 minutes.
I always got a kick out of the Hyper because you'd have 5 guys that like all played together at, Elwood High School out there setting screens, running a motion offense, playing pickup ball, and you're like, what in the world? Do you have any
tickets left over, parking tickets? I bet if they checked into my name, I bet I have a ton.
Jay Edwards had like $800 of them in one semester, right? And including parking in the president of the university spot.
45% for three-point range.
No doubt,
well
right?
Done.
All right, John's up next talking Colts, obviously IU, and again, Purdue ranked number 1 in college basketball. We will be back with you at noon tomorrow, and I thank you for listening to Query & Company.